I was thinking about this concept, the $1 million minute. If I valued every 60 seconds of my life as if it were $1 million, would I invest it differently? Instead of being like, hey, can you chat for 5 minutes? I just want to brainstorm something with you, and me getting all super excited about like, someone needs me, I'm needed. What I reframed in my mind is, do you have $5 million? It would make me stop and think, is this a good investment of my time? I would wait and I'm like, I'm going to respond to this person 24 hours from now. And they're like, oh, it's no longer 911. I don't need you anymore. And so it shifted how I reacted. And slowly, I started buying back my time and energy.
Well, hello there, people. Welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show that I really think that you are going to love. I really loved this conversation that I just had with my guest today, whose name is Heather Chauvin, which is French. She is a leadership coach who helps successful women in particular courageously and authentically live, work, and parent on their own terms. She has books out. We talked a lot today, though, which was so inspiring. I feel like we have very similar audiences of very capable, high-functioning women in particular, other people too. But we talked a lot about time and the value of our time. And she's got this whole process that we walked through of how we can value our time in a different way that really was impactful to me. She started her career as a social worker, basically helping adults understand children's behavior. But then in 2013, she had a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, and she tells that story beautifully in this interview. I was super moved. I think you will be super inspired. I hope that you enjoy this interview with Heather as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. I'm so excited to welcome Heather Chauvin to the Terri Cole Show. I really wanted to say it with like the French flair. Anyhow,
Terri,
welcome to the show, baby.
I'm so excited for this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Sure. You had me and I'm having you now. So let's talk about all the things. But before we get into all the things, what I would love for you to talk about first and foremost is sort of if you were a Marvel character, let's just say you'd have like an origin story. We all do what we do for so many reasons. So what is your backstory? How did you get here?
At this point, I'm a soul having a human experience, and the humanness in life is happening to me constantly, and this is where I landed today. But back in the day, mothering and motherhood was the thing that was my first crack. That was the first awakening. I was young. I was 18, single, and that was the first time when I realized I got to show up. And I remember looking at my son when he was born thinking, I don't want us to become a statistic. And Terri, you would appreciate this. Before mothering and motherhood, I was a teenager trying to find myself. I would say I was an underachiever. I wasn't the overachiever. I was the underachiever. And so that's what my identity was wrapped up in. But I didn't realize the underachieving was because I didn't see value in people pleasing. I didn't see value in overachieving to please others. But motherhood was the thing that hit me on a primal level where I was like, if I don't get this right, I have failed. And I'm already feeling like a failure because I'm doing this backwards. And so I did what every air quotes, good mother, good woman does. I read the books. I went to the doctors. I went to therapy. I asked questions. Over time, I was getting these pats on the back of like, oh, you're so good. You're so good. You're so good. But inside, I felt like I was dying because I was so misaligned. I was exhausted. I was fatigued. And I'm like trying to find mentorship of people that were like, hey, there is another way. And all I kept hearing was suck it up, buttercup. This is it. This is adulthood. And there was a part of me that knew I could not survive that way. And it wasn't until 2 other children later in 2013, so that was 9 years after I became a mother, became a social worker, left social work, followed the dream, blah, blah, blah. Here I am in startup in my business. My youngest was a year old. And I was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer. And at that time, I read the books, I did all the things, I had the mentors. But for me, that was, okay, I'm done. I'm done with the suffering. I'm checking that box. No more. And that was me physically dying. But there were other parts of me that were like mentally, emotionally, spiritually dying way before that. And that was when I realized the duality and the like incongruence of that whisper and that desire of like, I can't live like this. I can't mother like this. This is not sustainable. And then when I got my diagnosis, so after that, I was like, nope, I am going to feel the way I want to feel in my life. I'm going to utilize my asset of time to figure out how to feel alive and aligned. And that's kind of where I'm at today.
Wow. So I have so many questions before we even get into, because, I'm actually myself pretty obsessed with time. I've had a very disordered relationship with time in the past, we will talk about. So I'm super excited for this conversation, sort of about the value of time. And I know you have a whole way of sort of approaching and relating to time that's going to be helpful to everybody. But I want to ask you, being a cancer survivor myself, but I was in my early 30s, I thought that was young. What was your internal experience of what you can remember of having that? You have young children, you get a stage 4 like what happened for you?
Yeah, I was 27 at the time. My abdomen was swollen, and that's how they found it. And at the time, I remember it's interesting how life works, how the universe works. I had a client, so I already left my corporate job, or I say my corporate job as a social worker. I had a coaching client who I was supporting, and her husband had a cancer diagnosis. And they lived about 5 hours away and just so happened connected me to a functional oncologist. And at the time, everything stopped. My world stopped. But every belief that I had around who I needed to be for everybody else drastically changed. And I remember like my whole worldview changed, but I remember like stopping and observing everybody coming at me and realizing I was everyone's rock. Like I didn't even realize at that point. I told you I was like underachiever. I became the overachiever, high functioning codependent.
Yeah, you did.
I had no idea that when people's rock is broken, they cannot function. That was a huge aha for me, but also my controlling nature of what if my kids eat a non-organic apple? What if, like the living in fear. I learned so much. And the other thing was my like lack of community and the nourishment that I craved just by being around like-minded people. Yeah, I gave myself full permission to do whatever the hell I wanted with whoever I wanted, how I wanted, emotional regulation on steroids, figuring out, like advocating for myself, figuring all the things out. It just completely dismantled my belief system and how I was supposed to show up in the world and feeling completely lost. I kept saying, once I was in remission, they just kind of drop you and they're like, okay, figure it out, figure out the new language, the culture, everything. And I was angry. I was resentful. I was pissed off. I was like, how dare you? This is horrible. You should not treat people this way. Going into medically induced menopause, that was fun.
Yeah, it's super great.
Yeah.
Oy.
Traumatizing. Yeah. I lost a lot of trust, but I gained a lot for myself.
But the medically induced menopause, especially if you didn't have doctors who were informing you of choices and hormone replacement therapy and things that you could do and how it was going to be, that alone is traumatizing on top of the trauma that you experienced.
Yeah. I didn't even know what that was at that point. I mean, now you hear about perimenopause, menopause, anything hormone related, like you can see that. Back then, I had no idea. And I'm so grateful I had alternative supports around me that were telling me what was going on, because my doctors definitely weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much, though, in your story that is self-advocating, that is being independent, that is you sort of thinking outside the box. And I find it interesting that your story of sort of, we face there's immortality consideration, right? Yours was a real consideration. I think mine was probably less so, but you don't know it. When you don't know anything about cancer, I was a cancer virgin myself when I had my experience. And so you're sort of like, oh my, wait, what? I thought this should happen to other people. Like this could actually happen to me. And there's no way to I think there's no way to not be changed by it. I mean, I could be wrong, but I was totally changed by my experience, because it's such a wake up call of the impermanence of life and the fragility of life, and when you're 30, you're like, obviously I'm going to be here for like a million more years, but it's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
So how did that inform how you went forward and what you decided then to do with your life?
I feel like before that, I had not so much an impermanence of life, but an appreciation for life itself. Like I felt kind of connected to it. This, of course, allowed you to know like it is legit temporary.
Yep.
But that's how I started to redefine my relationship with time. I knew that it wasn't the thing. I mean, Danielle Laporte, I know she's a friend of yours. And that's around when I was diagnosed, that was around the time her book Desire Map came out. And I remember reading it and just like obsessing over, it's not the thing I want, it's the feeling. And then all the other personal development books that you're reading, it's a feeling. We're after feelings.
Yep.
So I'm like, okay, how do I want to feel? I kept repeating that over and over and over again.
Yep.
How do I want to feel? I want to feel alive. I want to feel energized. Okay, great. But if I have no energy, if I have small children, how can I feel alive when I'm like going through treatments and I have little to no energy? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And I had to get very honest with myself. And there's a story I often tell where I was in the bathroom, as this is where we typically go when we're about to have a panic attack. Why not? Curl up in a ball. You don't want to be a burden to anybody with your emotions at 2:00 in the morning. And I'm holding the tears in and I'm just paralyzed in fear. And I'm like, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I could feel it. I was just like, it was in my bones. And I'm like, I can barely catch my breath. And I'm like, Heather, you are here. You are not dead yet. And I had to get my brain out of that like fight or flight, that freeze state. I had to get in the present moment. And I'm like, okay, what's the story you're telling yourself? You're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to die. And it's like, hey, but you're here. Like you are alive. And then I kept asking myself, well, how do you want to feel? I want to feel alive. So then I'm like, okay, what is something that you can do that is more in alignment with how you want to feel than how you are feeling? And then Terri, that's when I got scared again, because in that moment, I was like, I don't recall a time in my life when I felt alive. And I'm pretty sure most women can say that. Or it's like a moment, well, when I was in my 20s and when I was doing this or maybe not. And I couldn't actually recall that feeling. I was like, what does that even feel like?
Right.
So I knew that the things that I wanted and desired, they must have come from somewhere. And I had to have the courage to lean in and figure that out, or I was going to die. And so the next morning I woke up and I started putting things on my calendar, and I'm like, what would an alive person do? She's going to take a shower. And if that's all she has the capacity for, that's what she's going to do. And that's when I really started realigning and redefining my relationship with time, of like, you say you don't have time. You constantly repeat that over and over and over again. I'm going to show you don't have time. So let's invest it wisely. And so I started realigning my time with how I wanted to feel, who I wanted to become, and the life I wanted. And that kind of brought me to where I am today.
Wow. That story it's so inspiring because even in the not knowing, and Danielle, of course, is obviously a genius. Like she really is. I mean, the concepts, I was profoundly impacted by that book as well.
Mhm.
And I always looked at like core desired feelings, like suddenly, prior to that, like I was all ambition. It was all high functioning codependency. It was all get done. It was all run an agency. It was all whatever. And got to the top of the heap somewhere and realized, oh, the feeling I was chasing, it's not here. Crap. And suddenly Danielle provided this way of backing into decisions I was making in my life based on, is this thing, my core desired feeling was freedom, remains the same, has always been all of my life. Like my top most important thing is to be free. And now suddenly there was a way to go, oh, is this thing going to create more freedom or less freedom? If it's less freedom, maybe you don't want to do it. Like, before getting into situations. So let's talk a little bit about time and how you're relating to time now. Is it energetic time management that you're excited about? Like, what are you lit up about right now?
Yeah. So after that, I started teaching what I called energetic time management. And it was like step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this, step 4, because everyone wants a logical step-by-step process, right? And that got a lot of women. I mean, this was over 11 years ago. And when I started my work, it was parenting. How do you want to feel in your parenting? Okay, great. Let's begin to reverse engineer that. And then they would say to me, Heather, I don't have time. My marriage is falling apart. I don't like my career. And I was like, do you see how everything is connected? Or my teams, right? And so backing up to this, I'm like, guys, if we respected time the same way we culturally respect money, I guarantee you would invest it differently. And so when I wrote my book, Dying to Be a Good Mother, I was thinking about this concept, the $1 million minute. And I'm like, if I valued every 60 seconds of my life as if it were $1 million, would I invest it differently? And it was something as simple as, you have that person that's, I'm sure you talk about this a lot with high functioning codependency, like the people who are texting you or calling you, who need you. And instead of being like, hey, can you chat for 5 minutes? I just want to brainstorm something with you, and me getting all super excited about like, someone needs me, I'm needed. What I reframed in my mind is, do you have $5 million? So when someone's like, can I have 5 minutes of your time? What I would say, I would think in my mind is, do you have $5 million? And it would make me stop and think, is this a good investment of my time?
Right.
And it completely transformed how I communicated with people. Because if I was trying to break those patterns or heal those patterns, I would, number 1, have to feel those feelings within myself. But number 2, I would sit there and go, no, this isn't worth 5 minutes of my time, because I know what's going to happen if I invest this $5 million. So I would wait. And I'm like, I'm going to respond to this person 24 hours from now. Hey, I'm at capacity. Or, hey, what's up? How can I be of service right now? And they're like, oh, it's no longer 911. I don't need you anymore. And so it shifted how I reacted. And slowly, I started buying back my time and energy. And then that's where everyone's like, I want time flexibility. And I'm like, you say you don't have time to work out or go for that walk, but you just invested an hour scrolling on Instagram or attending a free freaking webinar that you had no intent of implementing just so you could get that high of information. And so it's like, where is the ROI of the time that you are investing? The richness in your relationships, the work that you want to do. And if you've been doing meaningful work, is that aligned? Have you up-leveled? Have you evolved? Like, always asking ourselves, like, where can I create more time? Where can I create more energy in my personal and professional life?
I love the idea of valuing time the way we value money. And I think that there really is just that brilliant switch of lens shifts where you would absolutely think about it differently. And what you're suggesting with how do we train other people. And what I love about what you just shared is that you didn't feel like you needed to have a big conversation with someone. You didn't take out the bullhorn to be like, guess what, everybody, everything's going to change. You changed your behavior. And when we think about relationships, they're all dances. So you changed your steps, and then the other people changed their steps to sort of match what you were doing. How did you really come up with this process? And how, if somebody's listening and they're like, I need help doing this, like I feel like I don't have enough time, what can they do? Is there like a quick overview of like, where do we start in this process?
So I always say, like, number one, that's a story or a belief that you're telling yourself. So just be mindful of it. Just be mindful of how many times you say, I don't have enough, right? Because through your behavior, it's like you're putting up the wall. You are no longer willing to receive more time. But you have time to be sick. I remember I was at a retreat. One of the women that attended rose her hand and she's like, I just need to tell you something. On the way here, I was just thinking about that time where I was just hoping and praying that I could veer off the side of the road slightly, just so I could get in a small accident and go to the hospital to get a break from my life.
Yep.
And I was like, is that not an aha moment for you? That these are the symptoms. So look at your symptoms. Look at the things that you want and desire. I love the journal prompt, wouldn't it be nice if? I'm not asking you, what do you want? That can feel very confronting to people. But what is it that's inside of you that wants to come up and out? Wouldn't it be nice if I could have a break? Wouldn't it be nice if I could take Fridays off? Wouldn't it be nice if my calendar felt spacious? Wouldn't it be nice? Whatever it is, these are all feelings you are after, right? So then line by line, going down and going, what is the feeling that I am actually after? And then once you understand the feeling, like you said, okay, did that feel in alignment with how I wanted to feel? Where can you buy back time and energy? So again, the $1 million minute concept. When I'm in a team meeting, when I'm planning my week, when I'm about to take action on something, number one, I'm asking myself, is this even my work to do? Or am I doing it because I'm avoiding feeling something? Is that my laundry to do after I've just went through a whole hoopla with my boys on how to do their own laundry, but I'm doing it because it's making me uncomfortable? Maybe I could say, hey, when's this going to get done? Maybe we can reiterate the process. And then when they call you out and say, well, why should I do my laundry anyways? I know your pattern. You're going to teach me how to do something. And then the next week, you're just going to do it for me.
Yeah.
And so it's really like, yeah, there's step by step on what we can do. But when you observe yourself, you become the watcher and you become incredibly curious about your own behavior.
Yep.
It's like, why do I do that? Instead of shaming ourselves, like I enjoyed laughing at myself at this point because there's so much value in being that quote unquote high achiever. But when you're in the shadow of it, that's where it gets sticky. That's where you get yourself in trouble. So I'm always, 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 always simplest. After I know what I want and desire and how I want to feel, I'm like, is this worth $1 million? Is this worth $10 million? Is this worth $100 million? And if the answer is yes, then I will lean in. And if the answer is no, then I don't.
Right. It's amazing, though, how we teach the people, as you so clearly stated with your kids, we teach them how to treat us. We say one thing, but the thing that actually matters is what we do. And of course, with, therapy clients who are in relationships and, talking about dating someone, they'll tell me what the person says to them. We should travel. We should go to France. I've got a wedding in 6 months, blah, blah, blah. But I'm always like, but what are they actually doing? And if they say, I'm going to call you on Friday, do they call? Do they not call? Because that, sort of the proof is in the pudding, and I think, and in the behavior, and in shifting our own behavior. Because really, when we were talking on your show about high functioning codependency and about like the amount of energy that we expend and the amount of emotional labor and the stuff that we do much of the time as women in particular. Not all, but I'm just going to say, I mean, that's what I know about. So that's the frame with which I look at it. Mm-hmm. But really what you're suggesting with the time is really questioning, how are we spending our time? And is it how we want to be spending our time? And is spending our time that way going to create the feelings that we want to feel? And it's also giving, the way that you're presenting this and talking about it, it gives us permission to kind of change our mind. Like maybe you used to do your kids' laundry and it made sense. They were younger then. Maybe no longer are you doing that, or do you want to do that?
Yeah.
And it's like we're constantly renegotiating our relationships as well, but it requires us to be uncomfortable, to have uncomfortable conversations, and you write, or actually we talked quite a bit about like breaking through resistance. Like, where does resistance come in here?
Yeah.
Right? Like, with changing what it is we want to change.
Yeah. I didn't even know what resistance was until I started the journey. And this is often what I see, maybe you see too, when people make a commitment to change. It's like you have your pattern awareness,
Mm-hmm.
and then I equate it to like skydiving. You have decided you're going to go skydiving. You have to sign up for it. You have to prep, and then you get in the plane, you have the backpack on, and then it's like, okay, it's time to go. It's that moment before you jump where you're like questioning your life decisions. The more you push up against taking the action, holding the boundary, right? People have so difficult time with boundaries. That moment is where the resistance pops up. And I'm like, befriend it. But you don't know that it's resistance until you've put in the reps to know, like, oh, this is how it works. This is your brain trying to keep you comfortable and safe. Mm-hmm. And so, I want to give a perfect example of this. We could talk about resistance. We can talk about, the theory of it. So, another example, my mother lives with us. Mm-hmm. I talk about this on the podcast all the time. And so I'm in the sandwich generation. She has, or sandwich gap of parenting my children, parenting my mother. And she just had a hip surgery. She had a surgery. This is her second one. The first one, I was like, I'm going to be the good daughter. I'm going to show up. I'm going to be the nurse. She's like, I won't need you that much. And I could feel myself just getting emotionally exhausted. Even having the physical boundary of I'm working, I can help you here, I can help you here. I was getting emotionally and energetically exhausted, even if the physical time wasn't being used, because I felt so bad and guilty for her pain, and I was taking it on and all the things.
Codependency.
Yes, raging codependency. Mm-hmm. So this time I was like, what can I do different? How do I want to feel? So I tried to front load all these things. And she said to me, it's okay. I won't need you that much. And I flat out looked at her and I said, you have no idea the emotional burden I carry when you decide not to take care of yourself. And she looked at me with big eyes and she laughed, because we do have the type of relationship where I feel safe enough to say that to her, where it wasn't me projecting onto her. But watching me this time versus that time, where I said, if you don't get this put in place, I will not be there to support you. And she said, oh, that's okay. And for me to watch and observe the natural consequence of her inaction and me wanting to go in and rescue and holding that boundary, watching that resistance is fascinating to me, because there's the resistance of doing the thing you want to do to feel the way you want to feel. And then there's the resistance of holding back when you know that if you say yes to it, you're overdoing. And so having the duality of both experiences, where I was like, this is not lack of preparation. This is lack of or communication. This is me holding a boundary saying, unfortunately, you have to feel the full range of your natural consequence, and observing how I'm uncomfortable, but I am not as uncomfortable as I was last time.
Right.
And that, I'm like, that I can tell I've healed some.
So you were able to actually do less and not do the things you said you weren't going to do because that was what she was supposed to be doing.
Right. But you
Wow.
could feel the resistance on both ends, right?
Yes.
Like if you're about to do that big scary thing that you're going to have freedom on the other side versus like having those emotionally uncomfortable conversations, trying to get the things in place, not being reactive. Like I was so proactive. I could feel the resistance. And then having the resistance on the other side when I'm holding the boundary, knowing that what is about to occur is not my mess to clean up.
Yep.
And yeah, it's honestly, I can say improving my relationship. Yes, healing the high functioning codependency, which I think there's always, we're always in co creation with that.
Yep.
But really developing an intimate, like deeply intimate relationship with these aspects, right? Of time itself, resistance, fear, guilt, all of that. That's where the sweetness comes in. That's where we can truly see the bigger picture.
Well, it's such a beautiful example of how you can feel when we prioritize ourselves. It's not necessary to overfunction. And again, this is what being in recovery from high functioning codependency looks like. It looks like having a certain level of self-consideration in the situation that you find yourself in, so that it is not completely debilitating to you or completely depleting to you. I have a question that I ask a lot of people who come on the show, so I want to ask you too. Personally, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle, and how did you overcome it if you have?
I would say parenting, and specifically, I think with my oldest, who reminds me so much of myself. When he is perceived struggling, that raging rescuer comes out in me. And the boundary is, at this point, we're 20 years in, the boundary is not even, he understands the boundary. It's me almost holding that emotional boundary within myself of, I can feel it. I can feel it. It's a primal thing that comes up and out. And I so badly am like, is this ever going to go away? And I don't think it is, because he's mirroring back to me that part of myself that I was like, oh, if somebody just showed up for me this way, all my problems would have been solved. And I'm like, no. So I would say it's with my children specifically, of watching them. I know they're going to quote unquote fail at something. I'm using air quotes. And I want to rescue.
I feel that so hardcore having kids. We just don't want them to fail, and yet we must allow them to live, and make their choices, and we can be there to support, and we can be in the foxhole. But wow, the desire to be like, but I have an idea. It's funny with my grown kids. I have 3 sons that are grown up, and I'll say, oh, they'll be telling me, a story, and I'll be like, well, I have a thought about that, or they're telling me a problem, and I'll always say, do you want to hear it? And I have to say, a lot of the times they're like, I'm good, and you're like, where
you're like, you do want to hear it. Come on.
It's really good. But the thing is, I love that they can, I actually tell a story in Too Much, that one of my sons was coming down with his partner and twins who were 8 years old, and they broke down on the side of the road on the Northway. It's a very busy, scary place. And actually one of my nieces was killed being broken down on a road. So it was like so triggering, where I was like, oh my God. And I immediately, I hear this too, he told me what happened. I barely even, he texted me. I could not have gotten on the phone faster calling people. I had a cousin who lived up in that area by Saranac Lake. I was tasking my entire family. My mother, I was like, call cousin Sarah, find out this. My sister, like, it was crazy. Like I went into like complete production mode. I would call the place to rent the car. I speak to him, and I was like, I spoke to the car rental place that's 2.4 miles away from you. And he was like, Terri, I did not ask you to call the car rental place. That's all he said. I was like, you're right. You didn't. And he's like, I already rented a car. The tow is on its way. Everything is fine. We'll be there in 90 minutes. I was like, okay, bye. But it was so funny how I sometimes, even when you're in recovery and even when you've done all the work that you've done, have done all the work that I've done, the triggering is it's so visceral and it's so fast that I call that, like in recovery from HFC, we call that like a slip. Like it was a moment. He wasn't mad when he got here. I wasn't mad at him. We're just going to be humans doing the best that we can on this evolutionary path. That's all we can do. But it's interesting that I think that children are probably our greatest teachers in that it's so, when you think about it, right, we are, and especially you, Heather, having a child at 18, like I'm still mind blown from that at the beginning of this interview. Like, wow, how we are tasked. They're like, hello, here's a human. Don't let them die. Yeah. You need to know how to do everything. You are thinking about these kids, this kid, all the time. That's what you're doing. You know where they all are, unless someone else is the default parent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so then you get to a point when they're 18, 19, 20, supposed to be, well, now you better be transitioning into an appropriate adult relationship with your adult kid. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Fucking how? Okay, I'm going to try. Act like an adult and maybe I will. Like there's all of these things that I feel like can get in the way of doing that. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. It's always fun, too, when your child becomes the same age that you were when you had them. And that brings up all of that, too. And so the work is never done. And I think, when you've been in the quote unquote personal development industry for a while, or you're a therapist, or you have that background, people assume you got it figured out. You have the magic pill. And I think it's the acceptance of life, being human, the duality. And like you said, when you have moments or you have slips, how quickly do you recover from that?
Yes, that's a great point. It's just like in relationships, right? It's not necessarily about the rupture, it's about the repair. And how quickly can we get back to, hey, I'm sorry, and let's actually sit down and figure this out. It isn't about being perfect, really, because we won't be, because we love big and this is just how it is. Yeah. It is about, do we allow ourselves, instead of, for me, I understood exactly why I reacted that way. I had compassion for myself. I was like, duh, it makes perfect sense. And you can just be sorry. When I saw him, I was like, oh, sorry for that ridiculous overreaction. He's like, not ridiculous, Sarah, I get it. Yeah. And done. Hugged me, happy he was there. That was it. So I think that part of so much of the work that you do, a lot of process work and a lot of evolutionary work, is like, there's always this room for the humanness that will never not be, Yeah. Indeed.
We need to realize we're human, and the more permission we give ourselves to go after the life that we want, and that it's always a co-creation with the energy that's coming at you, the relationships, the people, like the work, quote unquote, never stops. But once you figure out the game, it gets so fun. And some days it gets really shitty, but that's the point. I also don't believe in hard things. I just believe life is emotionally uncomfortable. Like it's not hard to experience a lot of what is happening or take action. It's emotionally uncomfortable. So when we learn to co-create with our emotions, life gets easier.
Oh, I love the reframe on that so much. So I think that's a perfect place to leave it. So tell us, where can we find you if people want to hang out with you some more, Heather?
So my podcast, Emotionally Uncomfortable, you can check me out on Instagram, my name at Heather Chauvin, Chauvin. I always like it when people listen to conversations and then send me a message, let me know what your takeaway was. But yeah.
Thank you. I love this. Let's do it again.
Thanks, Terri.